Ben Carter never thought he would miss the smell of disinfectant and the sound of dental drills. Back on Earth, those things had driven him crazy during his residency at the university hospital. Now, 3 years into his practice on Haven's Rest mining station, the familiar sounds of his clinic felt like home. The station orbited a gas giant in the outer rim, far from the comfortable cities of the inner colonies. Most doctors wouldn't come this far out, but Ben had always been different. He liked challenges, and treating aliens with completely different dental structures was definitely challenging. His waiting room looked like a rainbow had exploded inside a furniture store. Purple chairs for the tall, thin Altarians who needed extra back support. Low, wide benches for the rock-like granite people who couldn't bend their knees. Even a small pool filled with special breathing fluid for the rare aquatic visitors. The universal translator hanging around his neck had cost him 6 months of savings, but it was worth every credit when he could finally understand what hurt. Ben finished cleaning his instruments and looked at the appointment schedule on his wall screen. 3 routine cleanings for some Altarian miners, 1 filling for a human cargo pilot, and hopefully an early end to his day. He had been reading about Earth's ancient history and wanted to finish a chapter about the old space program. Sometimes, he wondered what those first astronauts would think about humans living among the stars like this. The emergency alarm split the air like a knife through paper. Ben jumped up from his desk, knocking over his cup of synthetic coffee. The brown liquid spread across his patient files, but he ignored the mess. Emergency alarms on Haven's Rest usually meant mining accidents or equipment failures. They never meant anything that would need a dentist. The alarm kept screaming its urgent warning while Ben tried to figure out what was happening. Then something crashed through his waiting room. The automatic doors, designed to handle beings up to 8 feet tall and half a ton in weight, bent inward, with a screech of tortured metal. Sparks flew from broken sensors as something small and fast tumbled through the opening. Ben heard the sound of overturned chairs and breaking glass as whatever it was bounced off his carefully arranged furniture. Ben grabbed his emergency medical kit and ran toward the waiting room. He had treated injured miners before, but usually, they came in on stretchers carried by their friends. Whatever had just crashed through his doors was moving around on its own, and it sounded upset. Very upset. When Ben reached the waiting room, he stopped so suddenly that he almost fell over his own feet. A creature no bigger than a house cat sat in the middle of his ruined furniture, but this was no cat. Copper-colored scales covered its body like tiny mirrors, reflecting the clinic's lights in thousands of sparkles. It had 4 legs, 2 small wings, and a long tail that ended in a diamond-shaped tip. Its head was reptilian but somehow familiar, like something from old Earth stories about knights and princesses. It was a dragon. A baby dragon. The little creature's chest moved up and down so fast that Ben worried it might be having trouble breathing. Tears ran down its pointed snout, and one side of its face was swollen to twice the normal size. When it saw Ben, it tried to back away but stumbled over a broken chair leg. The movement made it cry out in pain, and the sound went straight to Ben's heart. Ben knelt down slowly, keeping his hands where the dragon could see them. He had learned this technique from treating frightened children, though he had never used it on something that might be able to breathe fire. The dragon's eyes were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, like molten gold with flecks of green and blue. Despite their beauty, those eyes held more pain than any creature should have to bear. The universal translator around Ben's neck crackled to life with static, then cleared up enough to carry words. The voice was high and sweet, like a child's, but filled with agony, pain. Tooth. Hurt so much. Please. Ben's medical training took over. He had studied xenobiology as part of his degree, including a unit on theoretical dragon physiology. Dragons were supposed to be myths, stories told by the first human explorers who had misidentified large reptilian aliens. But the textbooks had been wrong about a lot of things. They said faster-than-light travel was impossible too, and here Ben was, light years from Earth. "It's okay," Ben said softly, not sure if the dragon could understand him without a translator of its own. "I'm a doctor. I help fix things that hurt." The dragon's golden eyes studied his face with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. Ben could see the moment when the little creature decided to trust him. Its rapid breathing slowed slightly and it stopped trying to back away. Ben opened his medical kit and pulled out his portable scanner. The device was designed to work on most known species, though he had no idea if it would recognize dragon physiology. When he held it up, the dragon flinched but didn't run away. "I need to see what's wrong," Ben explained, moving the scanner slowly toward the swollen side of the dragon's face. "This won't hurt, I promise." The scanner beeped softly as it analyzed whatever it found. Ben looked at the readout and whistled under his breath. The dragon had what looked like a severe tooth infection, but the tooth structure was unlike anything in his medical database. The roots went deep into the jaw, and the infection was spreading fast. Outside his clinic, something he couldn't see watched through the darkness of space. It was huge, larger than any ship that had ever docked at Haven's Rest, and it waited with the patience of something very old and very dangerous. The creature watching had scales like polished obsidian and eyes that had seen the birth and death of stars. It had been searching for 3 days, following a trail that led to this small medical clinic on the edge of nowhere. Empress Sarah, ruler of the Draconic Empire, and mother to the small creature now trusting a human stranger with her. Pain, prepared to destroy everything in sight if her daughter was harmed. She had already lost too much to trust easily, but something made her wait. Made her watch as the soft pink creature knelt beside her child with gentle hands and worried eyes. The human couldn't possibly know that he held the future of 2 species in his hands. He only knew that a child was hurting, and he was the only one who could help. The little dragon had a name, though it took several minutes of careful communication through the translator for Ben to understand it. She called herself Pip, which seemed to be a shortened version of something much longer and more complicated. The translator kept trying to render her full name, but gave up after producing a series of clicks and whistles that hurt Ben's ears. Pip sat very still while Ben examined her swollen jaw, though he could see her trying not to cry. Her scales were warm to the touch, warmer than human skin but not uncomfortably hot. When he pressed gently around the infection, she whimpered and small wisps of smoke came from her nostrils. Ben tried not to think about what would happen if she sneezed while he was working in her mouth. The infection was worse than Ben had first thought. According to his scanner, the tooth was what humans would call a wisdom tooth, but in dragons it seemed to serve a different purpose. The root system was incredibly complex, almost like the tooth was meant to be some kind of organic tool. Ben's xenobiology textbooks had mentioned that dragon teeth might have special functions, but the books were mostly guesswork based on old stories and fossil fragments. Ben prepared a mild pain medication that should work on most carbon-based life forms. He had used it successfully on Altarians and even on the rock-like granite people, though their silicon-based biology made everything complicated. Dragons seemed to be more like Earth reptiles, which meant the medication should be safe in small doses. "This will help with the pain," Ben explained to Pip as he prepared the injection. "Just a little pinch and then you'll feel much better." Pip looked at the needle and her eyes went wide with terror. She tried to scramble backward, but her infected tooth sent shooting pain through her jaw. The pain made her cry out, and this time the sound was accompanied by a jet of flame that scorched the ceiling above Ben's head. Ben jumped back, patting out small fires that had started on his sleeve. The smell of burned fabric filled the air, along with something that reminded him of sulfur and ozone. Pip looked horrified at what she had done and curled up into a small ball, her wings wrapped around her body like a shield. "I'm sorry," came the translated voice, small and frightened. "I don't mean to. When scared or hurt, fire comes out. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Ben's heart broke for the little creature. She was in pain, scared, and now ashamed of her natural reflexes. He had dealt with difficult patients before, but never one who could accidentally burn down his clinic. He needed a completely different approach. Ben walked over to his storage cabinet and pulled out a small bottle that he had almost forgotten about. It was bubble solution, the kind made for human children to play with. He had bought it months ago when a human family with young kids had come through the station. The children had been fascinated by the simple toy, and Ben had thought other young patients might enjoy it too. He had never found the right opportunity to use it until now. Ben unscrewed the cap and pulled out the small plastic wand that came with the solution. He dipped it in the soapy liquid and blew gently, sending a stream of rainbow-colored bubbles floating through the air of his clinic. Pip's head came up immediately. Her golden eyes tracked the floating spheres with complete fascination. When one bubble drifted close to her, she reached out very carefully with one small claw and popped it. The tiny splash of soapy water on her scales made her blink in surprise. "Pretty," said the translator as Pip watched more bubbles float around her. "What are they?" "Just soap and water," Ben said, blowing more bubbles. "They're for fun. Human. Children like to play with them." Ben kept blowing bubbles while he slowly moved closer to Pip. She was so focused on the floating spheres that she didn't notice when he sat down beside her. When a large bubble landed on her nose and popped, she made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "Can you try to hold very still for me?" Ben asked, still creating more bubbles. "I need to give you medicine to stop the pain, but I need you to be brave." Pip nodded, though she kept watching the bubbles floating around them. Ben prepared the injection again, this time moving very slowly and talking continuously about how the bubbles were made and why they were different colors. When he finally gave Pip the shot, she barely seemed to notice. She was too busy trying to catch 3 bubbles at once. The pain medication worked quickly. Ben watched as the tension left Pip's small body and the constant whimpering stopped. She was still fascinated by the bubbles, but now she seemed more curious than afraid. "Better?" Ben asked. "Much better," Pip said through the translator. "The hurt is going away, thank you." Now came the difficult part. Ben needed to actually work on the infected tooth, and that would require getting inside Pip's mouth with dental tools. Even with pain medication, the procedure would be uncomfortable. He would need to keep her distracted and calm. Ben set up his portable dental equipment, the kind he used for emergency calls to other parts of the station. Everything was smaller and more portable than his main office setup, but it would work for what he needed to do. He kept blowing bubbles while he worked, filling the air around them with floating spheres of every color. "I need to look inside your mouth now," Ben explained. "It might feel strange, but it won't hurt like before. Can you open wide for me?" Pip opened her mouth, revealing rows of sharp white teeth and a tongue that was longer than Ben had expected. Her mouth was definitely designed for a carnivorous diet, but the overall structure wasn't that different from other reptilian species he had studied. The infected tooth was easy to spot. It was darker than the others, and the gum around it was swollen and red. Ben worked with infinite care, using his smallest tools to clean out the infection and assess the damage. Dragon tooth enamel was harder than human enamel, almost like ceramic, but the root structure was surprisingly delicate. Every few minutes he would stop to blow more bubbles, keeping Pip calm and distracted. Outside the clinic, hidden in the darkness between stars, something vast and ancient watched through sensors that could detect a single heartbeat from 1,000 miles away. Empress Sarah had been ready to reduce the entire mining station to plasma and space dust, but now she found herself studying the strange ritual unfolding in the small medical facility. The human's techniques were primitive by dragon standards. His tools were crude, and his understanding of dragon physiology was obviously limited. But there was something else. Something that made Sarah lean forward on her command throne and watch more carefully. The human's hands never shook, even when working millimeters away from teeth that could bite through steel. His voice never changed from its gentle, reassuring tone, even when Pip accidentally scratched his arm with a frightened claw movement. When drops of his red blood fell onto his white coat, he simply wiped them away and continued working as if nothing had happened. Sarah had ruled the Draconic Empire for over 3 centuries. She had seen every form of medical treatment known to her people, from the most advanced healing technology to the ancient arts practiced by the elder dragons. But she had never seen anything quite like this. The human treated her daughter not as a dangerous creature to be restrained, not as royalty to be honored, but simply as a frightened child who needed help. When Pip made happy chirping sounds at a particularly impressive cluster of bubbles, Sarah felt something she had not experienced in decades. It was the emotion she had almost forgotten existed, buried under centuries of imperial responsibilities and the weight of ruling an empire that spanned dozens of star systems. It was wonder, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was hope. The actual tooth extraction took longer than Ben had expected, but not because of any medical complications. Every time he made significant progress, Pip would become fascinated by something new. First, it was the way his dental light created rainbow patterns when it shone through the soap bubbles. Then she discovered that she could blow bubbles herself by puffing air gently through her nose, though her bubbles were warmer than Ben's and popped more quickly. Ben found himself working around her curiosity rather than fighting it. When she wanted to examine one of his dental tools, he would show her how it worked on a practice model first. When she got nervous about the suction device, he let her hold the tube and feel how it pulled air through her claws. Everything became a game, a learning experience that happened to include dental surgery. The infection was more serious than Ben had initially diagnosed. The tooth's root system had been damaged by trauma, probably from biting something too hard, and bacteria had gotten into the deep tissue. In a human patient, this would have meant major surgery and weeks of recovery. But dragon physiology was different in ways that Ben was discovering as he worked. Dragon teeth seemed to be designed to replace themselves throughout their lives, more like shark teeth than mammalian ones. The infected tooth was actually ready to fall out naturally, but the infection had prevented the normal process from completing. All Ben had to do was carefully remove the diseased tissue and help the new tooth that was already growing underneath. "You're going to have a shiny new tooth," Ben explained to Pip as he worked. "It's already growing in to replace this old one. Dragons are lucky that way." Pip tried to talk around Ben's instruments. "Will it hurt when the new one comes in?" "A little bit, like when human children lose their baby teeth, but nothing like the pain you had before, and the new tooth will be stronger and healthier." Ben cleaned the socket carefully and applied a healing gel that would prevent further infection. The gel was designed for use on various alien species, and it seemed to work well on dragon tissue. He could already see the swelling starting to go down. As he worked, Ben found himself thinking about the implications of what he was doing. Dragons were supposed to be extinct, if they had ever existed at all. The history books said they were myths created by early human explorers who had misunderstood what they were seeing. But Pip was definitely real, and she was definitely a dragon, which meant there were probably more dragons somewhere in the galaxy. Ben finished the procedure and stepped back to admire his work. The infected area looked much healthier already, and Pip seemed comfortable for the first time since she had crashed through his door. She was currently trying to catch 3 bubbles at once while making happy chirping sounds. "All done," Ben announced. "How does that feel?" Pip ran her tongue over the area where the infected tooth had been. Her eyes widened with relief and joy. "No more pain. It feels so much better." Thank you." But Ben wasn't finished yet. He pulled out a small mirror and held it so Pip could see inside her own mouth. "See? All clean and healthy now. But you need to take better care of your teeth, so this doesn't happen again." Ben showed Pip how to brush properly using a soft bristled brush that he had modified for her smaller mouth. Dragon teeth needed different care than human teeth, but the basic principles were the same. Remove food particles, prevent bacterial buildup, and be gentle with the gums. "You need to brush every day," Ben explained as he demonstrated the proper technique. "And be careful about biting things that are too hard. Your teeth are strong, but they're not indestructible." Ben prepared a special toothpaste for Pip, mixing ingredients that would be safe for her physiology. He had learned to be creative with alien biology, and most of the basic principles of dental hygiene worked across species lines. The paste would help prevent cavities and keep her mouth healthy. "This is yours to keep," Ben said, handing Pip the modified toothbrush and the tube of toothpaste. "Use just a tiny bit of the paste like this and brush gently in small circles." Pip practiced the brushing motion with intense concentration, her forked tongue getting in the way occasionally. When she got frustrated, Ben would blow more bubbles to make her laugh and help her relax. Eventually, she got the hang of it and seemed proud of her new skill. "I can do it myself now," Pip announced. "I will brush every day like you showed me." Ben was cleaning up his instruments when he noticed that Pip seemed reluctant to leave. She was still playing with the bubbles, but there was something sad in her golden eyes. The universal translator had been quiet for several minutes, which usually meant the wearer was thinking, rather than speaking. "Is something wrong?" Ben asked. "Are you still in pain?" "No pain," Pip said quietly. "But I don't know how to get home. I was exploring and got lost. Everything looks the same in space." Ben's heart sank. A lost child was bad enough, but a lost dragon child was a much bigger problem. He had no idea where dragons lived or how to contact them. For all he knew, Pip might be the last of her species, alone in a galaxy that thought her kind were myths. "What about your family? Are they looking for you?" "Mama is very busy," Pip said, and Ben could hear the loneliness in her voice even through the electronic translation. "She has to take care of the Empire. Important things. She probably doesn't know I'm gone yet." Empire? Ben filed that information away for later consideration. Right now, he had a more immediate problem. He couldn't just let a lost child wander around the mining station alone, especially not one who might accidentally set things on fire when she got scared. "Well, you can stay here until we figure out how to get you home safely," Ben decided. "I was about to have lunch anyway. Do you like fish?" Pip's eyes lit up with joy. "You would share food with me, even though I'm not your species?" "Of course," Ben said, surprised that she would even question it. "You're my patient and you're a child who needs help. That's what matters." Ben prepared a simple meal for both of them, sharing his food without any thought of the cost or the inconvenience. He had been raised to help people who needed help, and it didn't matter to him that Pip wasn't technically people by most definitions. She was intelligent, she was hurting, and she was alone. That was enough. As they ate together, Pip told Ben about her life. She lived in a place called the Dragon Realm, which sounded like it might be a space station or perhaps an entire planet. Her mother was important, though Pip was vague about the details. She had been exploring in a small ship when she got lost and her tooth started hurting so badly that she couldn't think straight. "I just flew toward the first lights I saw," Pip explained. "Your station looked safe and friendly. I didn't know where else to go." Ben found himself wondering about dragon society and how they lived. Did they have cities, families, schools for their children? Pip seemed well-educated and articulate, but she also seemed lonely in a way that went beyond being temporarily lost. Outside the clinic, hidden in the darkness of space, Empress Sarah watched her daughter eat lunch with a human stranger and felt her centuries-old certainties crumbling. She had been ready to destroy this entire system to get Pip back, but now she was seeing something she had never expected to witness. The human had healed her daughter's pain with primitive tools and infinite patience. He had fed her without asking for payment or recognition. He had treated her with kindness and respect, not because he knew who she was, but simply because she was a child who needed help. Sarah had ruled the Draconic Empire through strength and fear for 300 years. She had conquered entire star systems and brought dozens of alien species under dragon control. She was feared across half the galaxy, and her enemies spoke her name only in whispers. But this small, soft creature had accomplished something that all her power could never achieve. He had made her daughter truly happy, not with conquest or dominance, but with soap bubbles and gentle care. For the first time in centuries, Empress Sarah began to reconsider everything she thought she knew about strength and power and what it meant to rule an empire. The decision she was about to make would change the course of galactic history, but she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that her daughter was safe, happy, and learning to brush her teeth properly from a human who had never asked for anything in return. Perhaps it was time to meet this remarkable creature face to face. Ben was washing dishes in his small clinic kitchen when Pip suddenly went very still. She had been chattering happily about her favorite foods and asking questions about how humans prepared fish, but now she sat frozen with her head tilted to one side. Her golden eyes had gone wide and she was listening to something Ben couldn't hear. "What's wrong?" Ben asked, drying his hands on a towel. "Are you feeling sick? Is your tooth hurting again?" Pip shook her head slowly, never taking her eyes off the window that looked out into space. "Mama," she whispered, and the universal translator made her voice sound both excited and nervous. "Mama is here." Ben looked out the window but saw nothing except the usual view of stars and the distant gas giant that Haven's Rest orbited. A few cargo ships moved between the station and the mining platforms, their lights blinking in regular patterns. Everything looked normal, but Ben had learned to trust his patients when they sensed things he couldn't. "Are you sure?" Ben asked. "I don't see any ships out there that look different." "She's hiding," Pip explained. "Dragons are very good at hiding when they want to, but I can feel her. She's watching us." Ben felt a chill run down his spine. If Pip's mother was anything like her daughter, she was a dragon. But if she was Pip's mother, she was probably much, much larger. And if she had been watching them this whole time, she had seen Ben performing dental surgery on her child with primitive tools and no real understanding of dragon anatomy. Ben tried not to think about what an angry dragon mother might do to someone who had hurt her baby, even accidentally. "Is she angry with me?" Ben asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "For treating you without permission?" Pip considered this question seriously. "I don't think so. She feels curious and surprised. Mama doesn't get surprised very often." Ben walked over to the window and looked out more carefully. If there was a dragon ship out there hiding somehow, it was invisible to his eyes. But that didn't mean much. Human technology was still primitive compared to what some alien species could do, and dragons were clearly far more advanced than the textbooks had suggested. "Should I do something?" Ben asked. "Send a message? Signal that you're safe?" Before Pip could answer, the space outside Ben's window began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The effect spread across an area that seemed impossibly large, and Ben realized he was watching some kind of cloaking device deactivating. What emerged from the shimmer made him sit down hard in the nearest chair. The ship was enormous, easily the size of a small city. Its hull was dark as polished obsidian and covered with flowing designs that seemed to move and change as Ben watched. Lights glowed along its length in patterns that reminded him of dragon scales, and the whole vessel radiated an aura of ancient power and barely contained force. Ben had seen military ships before, cargo haulers the size of office buildings, even a few alien vessels that defied human understanding of physics. But nothing had prepared him for the sheer presence of this dragon ship. It didn't just occupy space. It commanded space, making everything around it seem small and insignificant. "That's your mother's ship?" Ben asked weakly. "One of them," Pip said casually, as if city-sized starships were nothing unusual. "She has bigger ones, but this is her favorite for traveling. It has the best kitchens." Ben watched in fascination and growing terror as a docking tube extended from the massive vessel toward his clinic. The tube was easily large enough to accommodate something much bigger than Pip, and Ben began to understand just how much trouble he might be in. He had treated an injured child, but that child apparently came from a species that could build ships capable of destroying entire space stations. The docking tube connected to Ben's clinic with a soft thud that he felt through the floor. Lights flickered along the tube's length, and Ben heard the sound of massive airlocks cycling open. Whatever was coming to visit him, it was big enough to need serious life support systems. Ben stood up and tried to look presentable. His medical coat was stained with coffee and had small burn marks from Pip's earlier panic, but it was the best he could do. He had no idea what protocol was appropriate for meeting an alien parent, especially one who commanded ships the size of cities. "Should I bow?" Ben asked Pip. "Is there some kind of formal greeting I should know about?" "Just be yourself," Pip advised. "Mama doesn't like people who pretend to be something they're not." The airlock at the end of the docking tube opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. For a moment, Ben couldn't see anything except shadows and the gleam of metal. Then something moved in the darkness, and Ben got his first glimpse of what a full-grown dragon looked like. Empress Sarah was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. She stood nearly 20 feet tall, with scales that reflected light like black mirrors. Her wings were folded against her back, but Ben could see they would span the entire width of his clinic if extended. Her eyes were the same golden color as Pip's, but ancient and filled with the weight of centuries. When she moved, it was with the fluid grace of something that had never known fear and never needed to. Ben did the only thing that seemed appropriate, under the circumstances. He bowed as low as he could manage without falling over. "Your Majesty," he said, though he had no idea if that was the correct title. "I'm Dr. Ben Carter. Your daughter has been very brave during her treatment." Sarah studied, the small human who had dared to touch her child with alien hands and primitive tools. She had been prepared for many things when she decided to reveal herself, but the reality of meeting Ben face to face was different than she had expected. He was so small, so fragile looking. She could have crushed him without effort. Yet he stood his ground with quiet dignity. "You healed my child's pain," Sarah said, and her voice was like distant thunder rolling across mountains. The universal translator around Ben's neck worked overtime to render her words in human speech patterns. "It's what I do," Ben replied simply. "She was hurting and I could help. That's all that mattered." Sarah tilted her massive head to one side, studying Ben with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. In all her centuries of rule, no one had ever spoken to her with such casual honesty. Courtiers bowed and scraped and told her what they thought she wanted to hear. Enemies begged for mercy or hurled threats and curses. But this human simply stated facts as if her opinion was irrelevant to his actions. "Do you know who I am?" Sarah asked. "Pip's mother," Ben said. "And judging by that ship, someone very important, but mostly just Pip's mother." Pip had been watching this exchange with growing excitement. She bounded over to her mother and began chattering in rapid dragon, speech that was too fast for the translator to follow. Ben caught fragments about bubbles and toothbrushing and the nice human who shared his food, but most of it was lost in a stream of joyful reunion. Sarah listened to her daughter's story, with the part of her attention that wasn't focused on studying Ben. The human had moved to give them space for their reunion, but he hadn't fled or tried to hide. He simply waited patiently, the way someone might wait for friends to finish a conversation. When Pip finished her excited recounting, Sarah turned back to Ben with something that might have been the dragon equivalent of a smile. "My daughter tells me you taught her to make bubbles," Sarah said. "Among other things," Ben replied. "Proper dental hygiene is very important, especially for species with complex tooth replacement cycles." Sarah blinked in surprise. Very few beings in the galaxy would respond to a comment about bubbles with a lecture on dental care, and even fewer would do it while standing 3 feet away from a dragon who could incinerate them with a sneeze. "You are not afraid," Sarah observed. Ben considered this for a moment. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But fear isn't a good reason to abandon a patient or be rude to a parent. Besides, Pip is a wonderful child. Anyone who raised her can't be all bad." For the first time in 3 centuries, Empress Sarah found herself at a loss for words. Ben's clinic had never been designed to hold a 20-foot dragon, but Sarah managed to fold herself into the space with surprising grace. She curled her long body around the room's perimeter, her tail wrapping carefully around the furniture to avoid breaking anything. Her great head hovered near the ceiling, golden eyes taking in every detail of the small medical facility where her daughter had been treated. Pip had claimed her favorite spot on Ben's desk, where she could see both her mother and her new friend. She was currently practicing her toothbrushing technique for Sarah's benefit, though she kept getting distracted by the bubbles that Ben continued to blow whenever the conversation grew too serious. "Tell me about your empire," Ben said, settling into his desk chair as if having a conversation with a dragon empress was something he did every day. "Pip mentioned that you're very busy with important things." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. In her experience, beings who asked about the Draconic Empire usually wanted something. They were either potential enemies gathering intelligence or potential allies looking for advantage. But Ben's question sounded genuinely curious, the way someone might ask about a neighbor's job. "We rule 47 star systems," Sarah said carefully. 300 worlds. Over 1 billion subjects of various species. Ben whistled softly. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility. No wonder you're busy all the time." "You are not impressed by our power?" Sarah asked. Ben shrugged. "I'm impressed by anyone who can manage 1 billion people without everything falling apart. I have trouble keeping track of 30 patients, but power for its own sake has never interested me much." Sarah found herself studying this strange human even more intently. Most beings reacted to news of the Draconic Empire with either fear or calculation. Fear was easy to understand and useful for maintaining control. Calculation was predictable and could be managed through careful negotiation. But Ben's casual acceptance of her empire as simply another fact about her life was completely outside her experience. "What does interest you?" Sarah asked. "Helping people feel better," Ben said without hesitation. "Solving problems, learning new things. Today I learned that dragon teeth have the most complex root system I've ever seen, and that young dragons are much braver than most adults I've treated." Pip beamed with pride at being called brave, and she demonstrated her bubble-popping technique for her mother's benefit. Sarah watched her daughter's joy with an expression that was hard to read, but Ben thought he detected something like wonder in those ancient golden eyes. "How long have you been alone on this station?" Sarah asked Ben. 3 years, it's not so bad. The miners are good people, and I get interesting cases from travelers passing through. Until today, though, I'd never treated anyone quite like Pip." "Do you not miss your own species? Your family?" Ben was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "I miss some things about Earth, but my family died in a transport accident when I was in medical school. That's part of why I came out here, actually. Earth had too many memories." Sarah felt something shift in her perception of the human. She had assumed he was just another adventurer seeking fame and fortune in the outer colonies. Instead, he was someone who had lost everything and chosen to build a new life helping strangers. The parallel to her own losses was uncomfortable and unexpected. "I am sorry for your loss," Sarah said, and she meant it. "Thank you. It was a long time ago now, and I've found a new kind of family here. Not blood relatives, but people I care about, and who care about me. Sometimes that's enough." Ben blew another stream of bubbles for Pip, who was teaching her mother the proper technique for catching them without popping them too early. Sarah found herself attempting to catch bubbles with one massive claw, moving with incredible delicacy to avoid destroying the fragile spheres. "Pip tells me she was exploring when she got lost," Ben said. "Does she do that often?" Sarah's expression grew troubled. "More often than I would like. The Empire requires much of my attention, and I fear I have not been the mother she deserves. She seeks adventure because she is lonely." "She's very intelligent," Ben observed, "and curious about everything. Those are good qualities, but they can lead to trouble if a child doesn't have enough supervision." "Indeed. I have been considering what to do about this problem." Ben hesitated, then decided to speak his mind. "If you don't mind me saying so, maybe the problem isn't that Pip needs more supervision. Maybe the problem is that she needs more of you." Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously, and the temperature in the room seemed to rise several degrees. "You presume to advise me on raising my child?" Ben didn't back down, though he kept his voice gentle. "I presume to care about a patient who's become my friend. Pip is wonderful, but she's lonely. She lit up when she talked about sharing lunch with me, not because the food was special, but because someone was paying attention to her. She needs her mother's time more than she needs protection from adventure. For a moment, Ben thought he had gone too far. Sarah's scales darkled like storm clouds, and he could smell the sharp scent that preceded dragonfire. But then Pip spoke up from her perch on the desk. Ben is right, Mama. I don't go exploring because I want to cause trouble. I go exploring because when you're busy with Empire things, there's nothing else to do, and no one to talk to. The fire went out of Sarah's eyes as quickly as it had appeared. She looked at her daughter with an expression of profound sadness, and Ben realized he was witnessing something very private and painful. You are lonely because of my choices, Sarah said to Pip. I have put the Empire before my child. And that was wrong. You have to take care of all those people, Pip said generously. I understand that it's important. Important, yes, but not more important than you. Ben watched this exchange with growing understanding. Sarah wasn't just a powerful empress. She was a single mother trying to balance the responsibilities of ruling an empire with the needs of her child. It was a problem that had no easy solutions, but it was fundamentally a human problem despite the alien nature of the participants. Maybe there's a middle ground, Ben suggested carefully. Something that lets you be a good empress and a good mother at the same time. Sarah turned her attention back to Ben. What do you mean? Well, Pip is curious about other species and other ways of life. What if that curiosity could be part of her education instead of something that gets her into trouble? She could learn about the different peoples in your empire by meeting them safely, with proper supervision. It would give you time together, while also preparing her for whatever role she'll play in the empire someday. Sarah considered this idea while Pip bounced excitedly on the desk. You would suggest that I bring my daughter with me on diplomatic missions? Why not? She's smart enough to learn from watching, and young enough to see things without prejudice. Some of your subjects might be more comfortable dealing with a dragon child than with a dragon empress, especially if they've never met dragons before. Ben blew more bubbles while Sarah thought, filling the air with rainbow spheres that caught the light from her scales. Pip was attempting to teach her mother the finer points of bubble-catching technique, and Ben was struck by how normal the scene looked despite its inherent impossibility. You have given me much to consider, Sarah said finally, both about my daughter and about the nature of strength and power. What do you mean? Ben asked. For centuries I have ruled through fear and force. It has been effective, but it has also been lonely. Watching you with my daughter has shown me that there are other kinds of strength. The strength to heal rather than harm. The strength to trust rather than control. Perhaps it is time for the Draconic Empire to learn new ways of solving problems. Ben looked up at the massive dragon who controlled the fate of billions, and saw not an empress, but a mother who wanted to do better for her child and her people. It was a recognition that would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Outside, the mining station continued its routine operations, unaware that the seeds of the greatest transformation in galactic history were being planted in a small dental clinic over soap bubbles and toothbrushing lessons. 3 months after Pip crashed through his door, Ben Carter stood in what used to be his small dental clinic and marveled at how much his life had changed. The space had been expanded 3 times to accommodate dragon patients of various sizes, and his waiting room now looked like a miniature spaceport with beings from across the galaxy, coming and going at all hours. Ben still insisted on personally treating every young dragon who came to see him, though he now had a staff of 12 assistants from different species. The Altarian nurse was particularly good with nervous patients, and the granite medic had developed new techniques for working with the silicon-based beings who occasionally needed dental care. But when a dragon child arrived with a toothache, everyone knew to call for Dr. Ben and his famous soap bubbles. The changes went far beyond his clinic. Haven's Rest had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a neutral meeting ground where the Draconic Empire conducted peaceful negotiations with other species. What had started as a mining station on the edge of nowhere was now the unofficial embassy for half the galaxy's major powers. Ben was cleaning his instruments after treating a young dragon named Spark, who had chipped a tooth learning to breathe fire properly when Sarah arrived for her weekly visit. She no longer needed the massive docking tube that had terrified Ben during their first meeting. Instead, she had learned to shapeshift into a more human-compatible size, though she was still, obviously and magnificently, a dragon. "How is young Spark?" Sarah asked, settling into the specially reinforced chair that Ben had installed for her visits. "He'll be fine. The tooth will regenerate completely within a few days. I told him to practice his fire breathing on metal targets instead of asteroids until he gets better control." Sarah nodded approvingly. Fire breathing technique was an important skill for young dragons, but the learning process often resulted in dental mishaps. She was grateful that Ben had become expert at treating such injuries. "Pip is with the Granite children again," Sarah reported. "She is teaching them to make bubbles, though they keep popping them too enthusiastically." Ben smiled. Pip had become something of an ambassador herself, making friends with children from dozens of species. Her natural curiosity and lack of prejudice made her perfect for the role, and she was learning more about diplomacy through play than most adults learned through formal training. "She's good with them," Ben said. "Yesterday I saw her showing a group of Altarian youngsters how dragon teeth work. They were fascinated. She has found her calling, I think. She wants to establish schools throughout the Empire where children of different species can learn together. It is not a traditional dragon approach to education, but then very little of what we do now is traditional." Ben had watched the transformation of the Draconic Empire with amazement and some pride. Sarah had begun incorporating human concepts of cooperation and mutual aid into her governing philosophy, and the results had been remarkable. Planets that had been held through fear and force were now willing partners in a true alliance. Trade flourished. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation instead of warfare, and the Empire was stronger than it had ever been. "The Galactic Council wants to formalize our status here," Sarah said. "They're proposing to make Haven's Rest an official diplomatic center with protections under interstellar law." "That's wonderful," Ben said, "though I hope it won't change things too much. I like being able to treat patients without worrying about political protocols." "Your clinic will remain exactly as it is," Sarah assured him. "I have made that a condition of any agreement. The dragon children still need their bubbles and their gentle human dentist." Ben finished sterilizing his tools and sat down across from Sarah. Even at her reduced size, she was still an impressive presence, but Ben had grown comfortable with her over the months. Their friendship had developed slowly, built on shared concern for Pip and mutual respect for each other's dedication to helping others. "I've been thinking about what you said the first day we met," Ben said. "About ruling through fear and force. Do you ever miss the old way of doing things?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes it was simpler. When I commanded through fear, I never had to wonder if my subjects agreed with my decisions. But simplicity is not the same as effectiveness. The Empire is more prosperous now, more stable, and my people are happier. Fear may be simple, but cooperation is stronger." "What changed your mind? Was it really just watching me blow soap bubbles?" "Not the bubbles themselves," Sarah said with something like a smile. "It was watching how you treated Pip. You saw a frightened child in pain and you helped her, not because you hoped to gain something, but because helping was the right thing to do. You had no way of knowing who she was or what the consequences might be, but you acted with kindness anyway." Ben felt embarrassed by the praise. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No, they would not have. I have lived for centuries and traveled across the galaxy. I have seen how most beings react when faced with something they do not understand. They respond with fear or greed or hatred. You responded with compassion. That is rare, Ben Carter, rarer than you know." Outside the clinic, Ben could see the bustling activity of what was now being called the Haven's Rest Diplomatic Quarter. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went, carrying ambassadors and traders and tourists who wanted to see the place where dragons and humans had learned to work together. Children from across the galaxy played in the station's parks, their laughter translating perfectly across all species barriers. Do you think it will last? Ben asked. This peace we've built here? All things change eventually, Sarah said philosophically. But we have created something important here. We have shown that different species can work together, that strength comes from cooperation rather than conquest. Even if Haven's Rest someday changes, the example will remain. Ben nodded, thinking about the future. He had requests from medical schools across human space, asking him to teach his techniques for treating alien species. The Galactic Medical Association wanted him to write a textbook on xenodentistry. There was even talk of establishing a university on Haven's Rest dedicated to interspecies medicine. But for now, Ben was content to continue doing what he had always done, helping patients feel better, one tooth at a time. Pip burst through the clinic doors with her usual dramatic flair, followed by a parade of young beings from half a dozen species. She had grown in the past 3 months, her scales now showing the deep copper color of approaching maturity, but she was still young enough to get excited about simple pleasures. Ben, we taught the granite children how to brush their teeth. They want to know if you have any special toothpaste for silicone-based dental care. Ben laughed and started gathering supplies. I'll mix something up for them. But first, let me check how your new tooth is coming in. Pip obediently opened her mouth for examination, proud to show off the perfectly formed replacement for the infected tooth Ben had removed months ago. The new tooth was stronger and wider than the old one, and it fit perfectly with the rest of her dental structure. Perfect, Ben announced. You've been taking very good care of your teeth. I brush every day just like you taught me. And I showed all the other children how to do it too. Some of them had never heard of dental hygiene before. Ben smiled and began mixing toothpaste for the visiting granite children, each tube carefully formulated for their unique physiology. It was detailed work that required precise knowledge of biochemistry and species compatibility, but it was also deeply satisfying. He was helping beings who had never had access to proper dental care, and through them, he was improving life for entire populations across the galaxy. As Ben worked, Sarah watched him with the same wonder she had felt during their first meeting. This small, gentle human had changed her world through simple acts of kindness and care. He had taught her daughter to brush her teeth and blow soap bubbles. But more importantly, he had shown both of them that there were better ways to solve problems than force and intimidation. The Galactic Council would later mark this period as the beginning of what historians called the Great Peace, when the most feared empire in known. Space transformed itself from conqueror to ally. Scholars would write millions of words analyzing the political and social factors that made such a transformation possible. But Ben never thought of his role in such grand terms. To him, he had simply done what any decent person would do when faced with a child in pain. He had helped. The fact that this simple act of compassion had changed the course of galactic history was just a happy accident. Sometimes, though, Ben would look up at the stars visible through his clinic windows and marvel at how far those first small ripples of kindness had spread. A lost dragon child, a tube of soap bubbles, and a willingness to help someone in need had somehow grown into something beautiful and lasting. And in the end, perhaps that was the most human thing of all. The ability to change the universe one small act of kindness at a time.